freight efficiency with NACFE's Mike Roth and Friends.
Here in episode 112, we have joining us Deborah Lockridge. She's editor and associate publisher of Heavy Duty Trucking. She talks about why she loves the trucking industry and what makes heavy-duty trucking unique and its role in the trucking industry of providing perspective and insights. She also shares her opinion on whether trucking is more challenging now than it was in the past, and about how we are doing attracting women to the industry. Finally, she gives tips on what makes a good story. Hello, today we have joining us Deborah Lockridge. She is editor and associate publisher for Heavy Duty Trucking. Somebody I really appreciate talking to, not only for items like this, but just in general about the industry and how it's changed over the years. So, buckle up. Deborah and I are going to talk for a little while. Welcome, Deborah.
Good to be here, Mike.
Yeah, so I always start these with, this is Mike Roth and Friends is in the title of the podcast series. And so I'm pretty serious about sharing how we became friends. Do you remember, where and when we met and became friends?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. It's, when we've been around as long as we have, sometimes it's hard to remember those things. But I think I might have met you back when you were at Navistar for that matter. But I think it really was when you started with NACFE and got that deal with RMI, and ended up, I interviewed you. I did a Q&A I found on our website back in 2013, 2014.
For some people that I've worked with a lot in the last few years, I met them when I was at Navistar International, and that I left there in 2009. I did a lot of work with the media when we launched the construction truck, the vocational truck, the 7000 series with the new cab. That would have been back in 2002. So I remember meeting people and doing ride and drives and interviews with the likes of Tom Berg and many others back then. And then I kind of did some inside engineering work for a few years before I left. So then, with a lot of people that are with the magazines and in the media, kind of as soon as we started NACFE up. So it wouldn't have surprised me that we met in the early 2000s, but didn't really have a need to spend much time together until we kicked off.
May have, yeah. So
Yeah,
but
yeah. So let me ask you right away. I mean, what, NACFE, sometimes we're kind of considered a bit media, we do a lot of writing, we interview the industry, I think there's a bit of commonality between the work that you do and the work that we do. But it is quite different where we're a nonprofit and how might you characterize NACFE, with or alongside both Heavy Duty Trucking and the other the organizations like yours?
that's an interesting question. The lines with journalism and media and everything are so much more fluid these days. Yeah, absolutely. You are researching topics, you're interviewing people, you're writing, doing videos, very similar to some of the stuff we do. I think probably being nonprofit, that you have a little more um, flexibility, as far as wondering, well, uh, what do we
Yeah.
do that brings in advertising? Although I'm sure you have to have some sort of funding. But yeah, you guys do a great job, I think, with being sort of an independent voice out there looking at all this stuff.
Tell me about your career. How did you get to trucking? What kept you staying in it? A little bit about what makes you tick, Deborah.
All right. Well, I think like a lot of people, I sort of fell into trucking accidentally. Although my dad was a longtime mechanical engineering professor, and when I was a teenager, saying, "Man, you really ought to be an engineer, Deborah. Female engineers, boy, they're really in demand." I thought, "No, Dad, I want to be a writer." Uh, so went off and got a journalism degree in magazine, and about 5 years after I graduated, I was looking for a job, and the job I found happened to be with a company that published a trucking magazine.
By
Um,
the way, I'm going to interrupt you. Our daughter had a full scholarship Purdue in engineering, and I was saying the exact same things to her that your dad was saying to you. It was probably a decade or so later, but Logan did the same thing. She didn't go into writing, but she went to Hollywood and helped manage and direct and work on documentaries, reality TV, that sort of thing. So your story I get very closely, Deborah.
Well, the funny thing, what then happened was that I'd go home for the holidays or something, and dad and I would end up talking about things like drum brakes versus disc brakes and alternative fuels and, the rest of the family would look at us like we were crazy. I just fell in love with the industry. There's always stuff going on, interesting things to report on. I love the people.
Do you think our industry is unique with respect to that, or not? I mean, the reason I ask, and I've asked a couple of other podcast people that I've interviewed this same question because I wonder, like, if you were a nurse, right, and you say, well, nursing profession, they're all good people, and situations always changing. We got new this, new that. I, you know, because some of us get into these uh, parts of the market or parts of life and we stay in it, we're kind of insulated to it. And then do we just kind of make it feel good? And so we say that when we get at our point in our careers, or do we really think trucking's unique?
Probably somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. Trucking, although it is this huge, important, very important industry to the country, in some ways it seems small. I mean, people they go from one company to another, still within trucking. And so you kind of get to know a lot of the same people. I do think, it's from the journalism side, people are often surprised that we trucking editors, we're friends, we hang out together, we help each other, we mentor each other. And if you get into like some other like kinds of journalism, they're much more like cutthroat.
Our industry, it is small. I mean, sometimes it gets compared to automotive, right? Where we make, in the US, they produce and sell something like 16, 17 million cars a year. And, we have 300,000 heavy duty trucks and 300,000 light and medium duty trucks and vans. And so, it's a much smaller group, much more diverse. There's a SUV and a pickup truck and automotive. We've got everything, tons of different duty cycles and applications and vocations and the like. So I do think out of like necessity, we care about each other a good bit. Maybe that's kind of the question I'm offering here. I just think we do collaborate, we care, we have big challenges, NOx rules and things that we look at sometimes and we go, there's no way we can do that. And then we go figure it out. And sometimes we stub our toe a little, but most of the time we make things work. And so maybe that like necessity helps us be a close-knit industry.
And you deal a lot with this with what you do with NACFEs, is those trucking companies, fleets that are out there kind of in the front adopting new technologies or the early adopters, that how willing most of them are to share that knowledge of what they learned and what they did, what worked right and what didn't, with the rest of the industry, with people who are their competitors.
And particularly, I think when it comes to like fuel economy and sustainability and some of these things, these are close to safety where, we need to make progress fast. And so why not share the information? And the early adopters and leaders will stay in front of everybody else. Tell us a little bit about heavy duty trucking. What makes you unique in the space? And maybe what are a few things you're most proud of? I know you do the, top products. You have HDTX in the fall. You have various different things, but kind of just tell us about heavy duty trucking, and then maybe personally, what are you kind of most proud of over the last number of years?
Heavy duty trucking's been around for a long time. It started off as, I think it was Western Draymen and Horsemen or something like that in the very early like 1900s. And it's been really interesting from time to time to go back into some of those older magazine issues and look at what's changed and what hasn't. We've been talking about driver shortages for decades. Most of the people that work with us, write with us, have been in the industry a while. And so we have that kind of perspective and insight to try to help make sense of all of the stuff that's going on. Or, as I said, sometimes we're not the experts sometimes, but we know who to go to talk to who are.
Right.
We really try. Our goal is to help managers at trucking companies, whether it's 10 trucks or 10,000, and whether they're the safety manager or vice president of maintenance or in the C-suite or driver recruiting department, is trying to help them do their jobs better helping them and their companies be successful. And that's really, kind of our mission, whether it's trying to stay on top of all new technology or, trying to give them some how to, basic how to information. And so kind of a mix of all that. And then we do that in so many more ways than we did, 100 years ago. It's not just a magazine. It's an event. It's a website. It's e-newsletters. It's a podcast. It's videos. It's as many ways as we can try to reach out and get that information to people in the way that they want to consume it.
I'm going to ask you about like where you see trucking right now with respect to, technology and so forth. But I'm going to ask it a long question here. So,
Okay.
if I look back, it's easy to think that the times we're in are really challenging, right? I mean, it's just like because we're in it, we're dealing with it. Our calendars are full. We got all these meetings and all this stuff, and it now can always look daunting, I think. But been trying like to think as we're working on, connectivity, electrification, automation, self-driving trucks, hydrogen, all these different things. It sure feels like fleet managers in particular, but you and I and everybody else are dealing with extraordinarily complex things that are happening together right now. So like, I wake up in the morning thinking, man, this is, my predecessor didn't have to deal with all this stuff. Yet on the other hand, when I look back over the history of trucking, I mean, maybe before both of us, but 1970s and 80s, you had deregulation and a lot of changes there. You had oil embargo and, 55-mile-an-hour speed limits. And then we got into the 1990s and aughts with the NOx emissions every 3 years where, big changes in the powertrains of these trucks and after treatment that weighs and costs as much as the engines did in the old days. And then, in the 2000s, we've got fuel economy and greenhouse gas and electronics. And, somebody the other day said that there's 120 million lines of software code in these trucks. And it's just like mind blowing where we've come. So maybe if you could, like, how do you see where we are now? And is it really that much more challenging than we've been through before? Or are we just kind of complaining, or what?
Well, I mean, you're right in that there's been big transformational shifts in the past, with back to the development of the diesel engine and the economic deregulation of trucking back in 1980, and like you said, emissions, the rise of e-commerce, the digitization of everything, the Internet of Things. Um, I think maybe what's different today is it just feels like things are changing faster and that there are just so many of them layered on top of each other. Like you're not just dealing with one big challenge that every time you turn around, it's something different. You're trying to juggle all these different things, zero emissions and changing regulations and changing demographics and all the technology. So that I think maybe is kind of how I feel like it's different. That all this stuff is happening faster and just there's just so much change happening at the same time.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, and some of it's in conflict and some of it is like supportive. So let me, a couple examples that come to mind for me. I mean, well, we do a lot of work on electric trucks. We're trying to figure out, how do you make these trucks with longer charge time than diesel filling, with less range and these sort of things. Like, how do you make that work? But the fact that we've got all this data streaming from these trucks and through telematics and other things, and we can tell, you can take with not a lot of investment as a fleet. So you got 500 trucks. You can look at all of the operation of those 500 trucks for the last 5 years and know very detailed where did they go, how did they go, how far did they stop, did they get 500 miles in 11 hours, did they get 300 miles, or how did they deal with things? All that data really is helpful when we think about deploying electric trucks or natural gas or other things. So in that case, there's like two big things going on that kind of help you. So like maybe 1 + 1 = 5 or instead of 2. And then, the things that maybe conflict are things like, well, if we do get fully automated trucks, then they become a 24/7 asset because you don't have hours of service, if you don't have drivers, and if you have that, then boy, that's a lot harder to find time to charge the truck if, it could roll all the time. So, yeah, I tend to I agree with you. I think these are really challenging times because there's multiple things happening at the same time, some of which conflict and some of which
Right.
complement.
Yeah,
So,
that they're gonna affect other things that are going on.
yeah,
Um, yeah, that's absolutely. Of course, can you say about all the data? I think that's another thing that ends up being overwhelming. That yeah, there's all this data, but sometimes it can be hard to figure out how do you know what to do with it? How what's
yeah.
truly actionable? Is it clean data? That's something I've talking with fleets a lot over the years. Is that it just can be like it's just this fire hose at you and like overwhelms you.
Not sure I was gonna ask you this, and I'm usually cautious asking. Let me ask you a little bit about women, in our industry, women in trucking. I saw you, something recently that you were a Girl Scout, and so you were, you had some event or something recently where you were encouraging girls and women to look at trucking. How are we doing with being a a more open industry? I mean, clearly when I started it, not only at the truck driver level, but in the engineering offices and everything, it was a old white guys industry. I think we've changed some, but what's your perspective on where we are today? And I don't know if you want to talk about what are we doing well or some things we need to get better on, but how is it today versus 35 years ago for a woman trying to make a way in a career in trucking?
Partly depends on what part of the industry you're in, I think. But as I made a joke, I don't know, a couple years ago, was it ATA show, which there have been more women, I think, getting involved at that kind of level of management. And I made a joke that I had to wait for the ladies' room for the first time. I've been going to events with male, heavily male for so long. It was like, "Oh, it was great. I never have to wait for the restroom."
Yeah, professional football stadiums are starting to see the same thing, Deborah.
So, I do think in a lot of ways we've come far. I think we've still got a ways to go. Trying to just let people know that it is something to think about. I mean, I'm a Girl Scout leader, even though my daughter's grown, but I guess I don't know, I'm a glutton for punishment. I started a younger troop. But just from that young age of, hey, here's these women who are in the trucking industry. And I think it's important. I interviewed a young woman technician a couple months ago, 20-year-old. And, that's still very few women in that part of things. But it was, just great talking to her and her attitude, and pointing out
Yeah.
that, yeah, maybe she can't lift something as heavy as some of her male counterparts, but then again, she can reach into some spots that they can't. So there's, different people have different strengths and weaknesses, and more we can all work together to figure out how we leverage all those.
Yeah, I do think that technology and some of the cool stuff we're working on is pulling more women in. I mean, in Run on Less Electric Depot in 23, we interviewed 122 people at the 10 sites. 60 of them, 60, almost half of them were women.
That's great.
And, I remember asking some of them, like, why? And, it was like, these are cool. These are cool trucks. We had women truck drivers who were like, they're easy to drive. They're smooth to drive. I somebody mentioned that they like not having all those switches and they like having flat panel screens like your cell phone or tablet to go do things, like a lot of people don't. But I think some of this technology is pulling in a more diverse, maybe it's more than just women. Maybe it's, younger folks or others.
That's really probably, younger generation that they've grown up with a screen, in front of them in their hands, computer in their hand, their pocket, that they grew up with that. So that's gonna feel much more natural to them than sort of your traditional long haul truck.
Yeah, yeah. What makes we're kind of both storytellers in a way. We've talked about this a little bit earlier this afternoon, but what makes a good story?
The best ones, I think, are something that you can that the reader or listener or viewer or whatever can relate to. That there's something there that they either think, yeah, I get that, I understand that I could try that. Um, and I think that sometimes is what really makes a good story. And if you can tell a story through the lens of people as opposed to just facts,
Yeah.
again, that kind of being able to connect.
Given all this going on, what's your advice to people, whether they've been in the industry a long time or they're new to it? How do we get through and find the solutions that we need in these layers, as you said, of different challenges? What's some advice you have there?
Sometimes it's take a deep breath.
Yeah, yeah,
I think realizing, that it's a challenge, having some patience, doing research, whether it's talking to other people or groups, trying to get some perspective. It's like we were talking about earlier, is this, how much worse is this than things we've gone through before? So, because it can be, I mean, just from my perspective on the journalism side too, lots and lots of changes in technology. And sometimes I just have to sit back and go, okay, take
yeah.
a deep
Back to
breath.
basics. Take a breath. Back to basics.
Take it one step at a time. It's easy to get overwhelmed, I think. I've been talking to people about like how to deal with all the data. There's so much data, you could do so much with it. What's a challenge that you have, and how can that data or that technology fix it?
Thank you so much, Deborah. This has been helpful and I think insightful on how you help the industry. Thanks for all your work and appreciate you being on.
Thanks, Mike. Enjoyed being on, and thanks for what you do.
Freight Efficiency with NACFE's Mike Roth and Friends.